I'm Jonah Comstock, Editor-in-Chief at Pharma Forum. I'm here at ASCO 23 on Sunday. I'm joined by Jaydev Thakkar, the Chief Operating Officer at Biofourmis, which is a virtual remote patient monitoring company that works with healthcare as well as pharma and life sciences. Thanks for talking to me today, Jaydev.
Certainly. Thank you for having me here, Jonah.
So, tell the people a little more about Biofourmis and what you do, especially in the life sciences context, but also I'd love to hear what you're talking about at ASCO and what projects you're highlighting here.
Certainly. So Biofourmis works with the pharma companies on two major areas. One, accelerating drug development. So we provide them a platform that allows them from early stages of the clinical trial drug development, collecting remotely data, decentralization of clinical trial, novel biomarkers and endpoint. So that's the drug development side of it. And then drugs that are approved, we co-develop a remote patient management program that frequently enable real-world study, real-world evidence, as well as accelerate drugs utilization and outcome within the commercial setting. On care side, we've been the platform that many of the health systems have been now leveraging to virtualize the care, shift the care to patients' home.
So when we think about oncology, what are some of the projects you're doing that intersect with the oncology space and the work here at ASCO?
Yeah, I think, Jonah, what I find it is that we still run into a number of, both on health system side and particularly in pharma side, this notion that oncology, isn't it hard to manage patients remotely or virtually? You do need them to come back for their radiographic work, their chemotherapy work. So there are elements where one might think that remote patient management is difficult. The reality is quite the other way. We find that oncology is one of the areas where we have a number of projects going on. I would say at this point, top 5 of the 7 oncology companies are working with Biofourmis. Either we are helping them on the clinical trial side collect data remotely, or we are co-developing with them predictive algorithms like detection of CRS. It's a cytokine release syndrome, a side effect that really has a very high percentage of the patient end up reason why they end up dropping a clinical trial or clinical therapy. So working with pharma companies in developing an algorithm that can predict in a timely way, it now allows the physician to send the patient home rather than keep them for 8 days, 10 days, 15 days. So this shifting the patient at home sooner allows pharma companies to have faster and more effective clinical trial. And at the same time, on a clinical care side, it really makes the drug better utilized in longer therapy duration.
That's interesting that there's this different kind of use cases for the same technology for both improving the research, but also we start to see there's a use in these biomarkers in prevention and actually like understanding the disease better, right?
Yes, certainly. I think some of these technologies are giving us insight that earlier was just not possible. Imagine you are sending patient home after an initial novel drug, and you're going to see them, what, 2 week, 3 week after. What's happening in that 2 to 3 week, you have no idea. Now you've got technology, sensors and wearable that bridge that gap. You're truly finding out what's happening when the patient is living with that novel therapy, or in some cases an approved therapy, but still with limited data set, with an accelerated approval. So these technologies are really making it now feasible where you're monitoring patient in their day-to-day life and finding out, are there safety signals, are there efficacy signals, are there ways in which the side effects that you can better manage, and in turn resulting in patients staying on therapy with better outcome.
So in terms of the way that this technology has been changing, I'm sure you guys are always trying to stay on the cutting edge. How have you seen the space kind of changing with digital technology and with artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so I think if you start looking back, even after, I would say 5 years, number of projects that leverage a sensor, most of them were to collect the data and use it in a research in a retrospective way. This data was in many ways overwhelming data. You can't use this data without the use of some kind of an AI and machine learning tool to get any meaningful insight and drive actions. So what we see happening in the last few years is with this AI technology and machine learning algorithms available, you're able to change the paradigm. You're not only using the data as a way to prove the efficacy or safety in a clinical trial, but these data points are now available to better manage patient safety while the patient is going through the therapy, either in a approved drug setting or in a clinical research setting. In the absence of AI and machine learning, This excessive data is a liability, is a burden that physicians really were saying, look, we don't want all this variable data because we don't know how to leverage it. AI
Right.
has really been the key to the transformation.
So that's sort of so far, and that's really interesting. The sensor technology alone is not enough. You need the AI to manage the data. Where do you think, as AI advances and gets more uh, nuanced, better at certain functions, how is that going to even change further?
Yeah, what we find is that from being able to detect a certain adverse event or disease, likely we can see AI tools capable of predicting before something happens. And as that window of prediction continues to increase, like I'll give an example, CRS, cytokine release syndrome, as I was mentioning, is one of the critical negative effects of some of the very powerful drugs, CAR T. These drugs are very helpful to the patient. At the same time, the risk of this CRS is so high, so many patients either are stuck in hospital or they simply drop out. As these AI tools are becoming more capable of predicting, and we already see now at a 4 hour mark, at an 8 hour mark, we can predict with a reasonable accuracy the risk of a grade 3 or higher CRS. What this means is a physician can take an action of saying that, look, this patient's risk is relatively so low. I'm not going to burden that patient and keep them stuck in a hospital. Let them go home, and as long as they are within that 2 to 3 hour range, I can bring the patient back if they do end up getting the grade 3 CRS. Imagine if this technology now becomes even further predictive and you can pinpoint which patients are likely to get it even before they are infused with the drug. And all the rest of the patient now have the freedom not to be even within the 2 hour window or to be in a hotel nearby. So I think as the predictive capabilities improve, our ability to personalize the medication or personalize the treatment approaches is going to significantly grow.
That's really interesting because there's a lot of worry at a show like this about adverse events, right? And you're always looking at the safety profile as well as the efficacy of your drug, and it's you sort of have to accept, like, you just have to do a calculation, right? Is the risk the worth the benefit? But what you're talking about is sort of, rather than having to say either we accept the risk or not, we can say, each patient's risk is different. We can intercept these adverse events before they happen and, really get the benefit without
Precisely,
risk.
Jonah. I
Yeah.
think you said it very nicely. I think it's worth clarifying that what you're saying is precisely the what I see the technology is going to be capable of doing. That not only you're able to provide this an extra layer of safety, but you're able to do that at a personalized level. If I can go down to an individual's profile and based on their vital sign, based on their demographics, based on their health history and medical data, if we can pinpoint and say, here is the probability of this therapy at this dose working better for this patient versus someone else, or being able to guide which patient should be enabled with potential other treatment that might be needed to support the side effect profile that that patient has, you would be changing the risk reward profile of some of this drug. That could mean which drugs are carried forward in a pharma's pipeline or which drugs are canceled early on, because now you can tell at an individual level the probability of success or the safety signals.
Awesome. Anything else you've kind of observed talking to folks here? What are they interested in around sort of the space that you work in?
So when we talk to the pharma folks, frequently the question comes up around, how much do you believe this technology is actually ready? Are patients wanting to take that? Or is it a technology burden that the patients are feeling overwhelmed with? And the same question goes about the sites, particularly the clinical research side, study coordinators. They have a lot on their plate already. Are you overburdening them with another layer of technology? My usual answer, and this is becoming more of a trend now, is that look, the care is already shifting. We have an advantage of seeing that through our care side of the business, that number of hospitals and health system in the last 3 years have already moved towards supporting the patient, particularly in oncology setting, at their home. This is a combination of resources that go to patients' home as needed, and this remote monitoring and remote data collection. So I would say the care side of the ecosystem is already there. And the way they are there is not by making this site tech enabled or making them tech support, but rather giving them the layer of support needed so they can still focus on the patient while the technology support piece is provided by partners like Biofourmis. On the other hand, patients, are they ready for it? Oh, absolutely they are. However, there is a big thing that we need to keep in mind, that we need to design some of the solution keeping in mind patient. I'll give an example that one of our focus groups where we tend to learn firsthand from the patient, what would they prefer? And then we think that it is really crucial to hear firsthand from the patient. And one of the patient was taking us through his journey, that he's recently been diagnosed with a cancer. And the mental journey that he is going through, the options that he is being presented, and one of the option is to take part in a clinical trial. Now, in that clinical trial, as he's mentally getting prepared for the next phase of his life, which is very different just after the diagnosis, and this is less than a 10 days post-diagnosis, now he's been given a long lecture of here's the technology and the set of sensors that you need to keep on yourself, and make sure you submit this on a timely, make sure you do this and make sure you do that. How much of this patient is really able to keep up with him while he's going through cancer, a diagnosis that really changes the life? So what we are forgetting is patient is living life, and a disease is not something that he's really wanting to keep top of his mind. We got to build a solution that are designed for patient to get back to their normal life. Give them a sensor, not a set of sensors that, yes, researchers would love to collect as much data, but if we limit ourselves to no more than one sensor on a patient with a set of devices that are pre-integrated, provide them a technology support, a help desk, a coaching that is not assuming they already know how a touchscreen works. That is assuming how do you set up a Wi-Fi and a SSID password. Not too many people, particularly at certain age, are always familiar with that. So this is where I find that they are very much ready, and we have got people over 80 years old perfectly well participating in our program. I've seen adherence as much as 94 to 96%. But that is when painfully we learn ourselves that just throwing devices at the patient doesn't work. We really have to start with get the patient involved in our program, use their feedback to design something that meets where the patient is, and then keep the technology simple. Take all the rest of the burden either on the support that we build or simplifying the technology itself.
I'll ask one more question. Just kind of, I think it stems out of what you've just been talking about. Is just the idea of equity, right? Like, how do you make sure that these technologies are available to everyone, that the benefit from them accrues to everyone, and that when you're supporting on decentralized trials, that those trials are representative?
Fantastic question, Jonah. Again, another very important topic that I find a lot of the reason today often decentralized trial and technology is talked about is with this notion that we really have to be more focused on diversity and inclusion. And it's a fairly known fact that reason number of patients are today not able to participate in a clinical trial is the burden that the clinical trial imposes, that you need to be at a site once a week, in many cases more than once a week, take 3 to 4 hours out of your day. Most of these sites are 18 hours or 18 miles, 20 miles, 50 miles away. And that distance that they need to travel, often in the middle of the day, means they're either quitting their day job or going through significant hassle. So we do need to do something about making the trial reach them. But there is the other side of this coin that I'm starting to now see, which is when we start to make an inclusion criteria, it starts to now expect certain level of technology brought in by the patient. I love the idea of this BYOD. Let the patients bring the technology if they have a preference to use their own smartphone or a tablet. No one wants to carry 2 smartphones and 2 tablets. At the same time, let's be mindful. There are patients that are still not as comfortable with a smartphone technology. They're not going to be on a precisely either an iPhone or an Android. So when you look at clinical trials that put as an inclusion criteria, patient must bring an iPhone or patient must bring an Android phone. Patient must have some familiarity with submitting this online questionnaires or smartphone-based questionnaires and EPRO. We are creating now another layer of exclusion. Tech friendliness almost becoming a key. And look, I can imagine if you fast forward 30 years from now, the generation that is today growing in the culture of smart devices right from the few years old babies starting to play with, it might be okay. But we are not there yet. For the considerable period of time, we do need to be mindful of the patients that are not as familiar. How do we reach them? How do we make sure that the box of technology that is given to them is fully pre-configured? They're not figuring it out. To my previous point, SSID password. Technology is not becoming itself now a barrier in who can participate in a clinical trial. So if we use the technology the right way, I think it would increase the participation, diversity, and the inclusion, but not use the correct way. Unfortunately, it will create yet another layer of patients getting excluded.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me, Jaydev. It's been really interesting. I hope you're having a good show.
Indeed, thank you, John. I certainly think that over the years, I find continuously the innovation has continues to advance, and particularly in oncology, it seems there is a very good adoption of some of these innovations.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.